Week 10 of the fantasy football season is already here, and it's time to set those winning lineups on your way to the fantasy playoffs. And lucky for us, we have Michael Fabiano, SI's senior fantasy analyst, here to help us make all the best decisions. Fabs, it's getting down to the wire. It's really important that we make the right decisions at this point in the season. So that's why you're here, and you're going to help us. Who are we starting this week at quarterback? Your start for last week, my waiver wire pickup, worked out really well. We're doing it again?
Justin Fields is bananas good. Like, honestly, at this point, unless you have Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, assuming he's healthy, or Jalen Hurts, you're playing Justin Fields. He has been on fire. 27.6 fantasy points per game in the last 4 weeks. He's the number one quarterback in fantasy football over the last month. He's got the Lions this week. Their defense has allowed 24 plus points to quarterbacks 4 times. Justin Fields is really shooting up the rankings, the quarterback position. He's a guy that I liked in the preseason. Seemed like I was going to be wrong about him. Well, he has turned things around. And then let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa. He's been hot too. He's a top 10 quarterback, 24.1 fantasy points last week against the Bears. Now, this week's matchup against Cleveland's not great, but with Tua and Tyreek Hill, who you can argue is the MVP in fantasy football, and Jalen Waddle and that offense clicking on all cylinders, Tua's kind of matchup proof at this point, so I am still playing him against Cleveland.
I saw an Instagram video where Tyreek Hill was catching balls with syrup and butter on his hands.
I saw that too.
And that's just how good he is, and that also helps Tua Tagovailoa be better every week. It's unbelievable how good he's been. But though we like the young guys this week, we are not as excited about a couple of veterans.
Aaron Rodgers is toast. As a fantasy quarterback, he should not even be on a roster unless you're in a deeper league or a 2 QB league. I get it. I mean, he's Aaron Rodgers, but we're 9 weeks in now, guys. He's averaging 13.9 points. He hasn't scored more than 17 points in a game. I mean, it's been bananas terrible. And then you got a matchup against our beloved Dallas Cowboys, who've only allowed one quarterback to score more than 16.9 fantasy points against them. Aaron Rodgers should be on the bench or the waiver wire. And then I'm also sitting Kirk Cousins. Now, I get it. He's been pretty good lately. I don't love the matchup, though, against Buffalo. I know their defensive backfield's a little bit banged up, but they've allowed just one quarterback to score more than 15.2 fantasy points against them, and that was Patrick Mahomes. So I understand that Cousins have been good. If I have Justin Fields or a quarterback with a better matchup, I am sitting Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, speaking of Instagram videos, I'm sitting Kirk Cousins after that one this week, too. I don't know. He and Russ Wilson need to keep their playing shenanigans under wraps. Okay, running backs. Josh Jacobs, you love him. He's just turned out to be a stud this year.
Yeah, I know. The last couple of weeks, though, have not been good. I mean, the Raiders' offense is schizophrenic, right? I mean, they did not run the ball as much as I thought they would last week. I mean, he didn't have a terrible game, but I thought it'd be better. So that's why I'm putting him into the stardom list this week. It's basically validation for fantasy managers. You got the matchup against the Colts. They've allowed at least 16.8 fantasy points to a running back in 3 straight games, including over 20 to Antonio Gibson in week 8. So keep the faith in Josh Jacobs. And then Jamal Williams, he's now the lead back in Detroit. He has seen a 41% touch share in recent weeks compared to DeAndre Swift, who's seen just 16.5. But Jen, I think he could probably play both of them. This is a really good matchup against the Bears. They've allowed 7 different running backs to score 16 plus fantasy points. So Williams is the preferred option right now, but Swift, even being limited with the snaps because of the injuries, I still think you can flex him because the matchup's so good.
Now, as far as sit-in running backs, you're sitting a Steeler and a former Steeler. Both guys, no-go.
Right. Our pal Dave Damashek is not going to like this. But Najee Harris has been a sit-em for several weeks. And this week, it's not even about the matchup. I mean, the Saints got boat raced by Kenyon Drake. I guess I should call him Drake now. So the matchup's not bad. But Najee Harris is averaging 16.5 touches a game. He's losing work to Jalen Warren. He's averaging 3.3 yards per carry. That's terrible. So listen, I have him. I get it. You probably have to flex him. Don't expect a big stat line. And the same thing goes for James Conner, who came back last week and he didn't look bad, but he scored 11.4 fantasy points. I mean, that's a flex starter total, which is all he really is this week at best. This is not a great matchup. The Rams have been tough on opposing running backs. In fact, Jen, their defense hasn't allowed more than 14.6 fantasy points to a running back not named Christian McCaffrey. And they played him twice this year, one for the Niners and 1 for the Panthers. So James Conner is a risk-reward flex at best.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure Christian McCaffrey was actually playing running back in that game. It might have been quarterback or wide receiver. So yeah, I don't see that working out. I'm with you. Okay, moving over to wide receivers. Got a couple guys here on your start list that I'm really happy about because I think I may have slightly overinvested in them this year, and I need them to have a big week.
The Broncos wide receivers are good plays.
Yeah.
So whether it's Courtland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy, both guys should be active in fantasy leagues. The Titans defense has not been good against wide receivers. Look at the numbers. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to the position, and slot receivers have averaged the 8th most points. So that's good news for Jerry Jeudy. And even though Russell Wilson's kind of struggling, I still feel pretty confident in Sutton and Jeudy as wide receiver 2s or flexes this week based on the matchup. And I'm going to stick with Devontae Smith. I get it. He's had 2 stinkers in a row, 11.5 fantasy points combined in his last 2 games. But this is a good matchup against the Commanders. Their defense has given up 8 touchdowns and the 7th most points to perimeter receivers. And earlier this year, he beat them for 30.9 points. So I am sticking with Devontae Smith.
For your sit-em wideouts, you got a couple of wide receivers here that I know this has absolutely nothing to do with their talent because they are 2 of the most talented wideouts in the leagues. It has a lot to do with their terrible situations.
Right. Michael Pittman Jr. is going to be active in a lot of leagues, and I understand that. The quarterback position is questionable at best. The offensive line is awful. And then when you look at the matchup, the Raiders have given up just 1 touchdown and the 5th fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. So this isn't even a great matchup. I understand that Pittman's a valuable asset. There are question marks everywhere there, so you want to temper your expectations. And the same thing goes for Brandon Cooks, who's just not a happy camper right now. He didn't play last week because he wanted to be traded, and he was not. Unfortunately, I was hoping he would go to the Dallas Cowboys. It did not happen. Now he's expected to come back this week and face Big Blue. They're coming off a bye, and their defense has allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. That Texans offense is a mess. I get it. Brandon Cooks has probably got to be active in your lineups. He's a flex at best, and I would temper those expectations.
Total bummer. Have a few shares of Brandon Cooks as well. So bummed about that. I wanted him to go to the Cowboys as well. But hey, rumor is maybe we get OBJ. I don't know. Maybe it happens. Maybe it doesn't. Let's go to the tight end. Couple rookies here. You know, we complain every week about the tight end position, but this week, actually, I'm excited about these guys because we can start them and they may even be available on waiver wires.
I like that head thing you just did. It was like walk like an Egyptian there a little bit. Anyways, yeah, I mean, rookie tight ends, typically we tell you to stay away from them. Not right now. Cade Otton, who did nothing for like 3.5 quarters last week, ended up putting up a very good stat line, 17.8 fantasy points. Now he's playing overseas in Germany against the Seahawks. They've allowed 10 plus fantasy points to 8 tight ends, including TJ Hawkinson and Taysom Hill, who beat them for 30 apiece. So Otton is a very good start. And so is Greg Dulcich, who played in London 2 weeks ago. So we're getting a little international flair here. And he's got a really good matchup against the Titans. They've allowed 20 plus fantasy points to 2 tight ends and the 10th most points to the position overall. And Russell Wilson trusts this kid immensely, as we've seen from his target share. So yeah, that's where we're at right now. Cade Otton and Greg Dulcich, get him into your lineups.
Yeah, Russell Wilson really looked alive when he just decided to target Greg Dulcich in that 3rd quarter drive 2 weeks ago in London. And that's when it was like, okay, maybe Russell Wilson is alive. I don't know. All right, as far as who we're sitting at tight end, you don't like Aaron Rodgers. You also don't really think you should start his tight end this week. And that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I'm kind of bummed out about that because Robert Tonyan was a guy I liked last week, and he did bupkis. I mean, it was nothing. Against the Lions, really, you can't do anything. 5.9 points. And now you got to play the Dallas Cowboys and Micah Parsons in one of the top defenses in the National Football League. They've allowed just 1 tight end to score more than 9.7 fantasy points against them. They've only given up 1 touchdown to a tight end. Robert Tonyan was no Funyun last week, and I'm not playing him this week either. And then Mike Gesicki, I told you not to play him last week. He had a stinker. This is the most touchdown-dependent tight end in the history of the National Football League. If he scores a touchdown, he's awesome. If he doesn't, you get 3 points. And he's got the Browns this week. And the Browns have allowed just 1 tight end, that was Hunter Henry, to score a touchdown. What's more, their defense has allowed an average of fewer than 9 points per game to the position. So Mike Gesicki is a sit-em for me in Week 10.
The great news is if you can't get Mike Gesicki in your lineup, you don't want to start him, you can probably grab someone like Cade Otton or Greg Dulcich, both of whom have great matchups this week. I mean, Cade Otton's got the Seattle Seahawks. They've allowed a league-leading over 9 yards per target and 8 touchdowns to tight ends. So make that grab. Guys, it's getting down to the wire. We're giving you the best advice we possibly can at si.com/fantasy, but don't go anywhere before you hit that subscribe button because you're going to need all the videos to help you win down the stretch.